TBRI.
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 TOVD.
TBRI.
TBRI, Trust-Based Relational Intervention.
TBRI is an attachment-based,
Trauma-informed intervention
that is designed to meet the complex needs
of vulnerable children.
TBRI uses empowering principles
To address physical needs,
connecting principles for attachment needs,
and correcting principles to disarm fear-based behaviors.
While TBRI is based on years of attachment, sensory processing, and neuroscience research,
the heartbeat of TBRI is connection.
Hello, and welcome to the TBRI Podcast. You're listening to Season 13, Episode 1. On this show, we talk all about TBRI, or Trust-Based Relational Intervention. We talk about different elements of the model itself, and we also talk about how TBRI is applied in various communities of care and practice. I'm Emily Pickett, producer of the podcast, and today's episode is a conversation with Troy McPeak about implementing TBRI in juvenile justice settings. Troy is currently a regional training and consultation specialist here at KPICD, but his history with us goes way before that. If you have been around the pod for long, you've heard Troy before he worked for us, while he's worked for us, and you know that he brings a wealth of knowledge about juvenile justice. And today, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. So please enjoy this conversation with Sarah Mercado and Troy McPeak.
Hello, Troy. Good morning.
Hello, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm excited for our chat today.
Yes, ma'am. Me too. I've been looking forward to it.
We're just getting back from the holidays, so hopefully people will give us some grace around our brains re-engaging with work.
Are you still in holiday mode, Sarah?
I'm trying really hard not to be, but you know, it's hard. So I'm sure our friends listening completely understand that, as even though this won't be when they come back from work, they will understand.
Hopefully.
I'm excited to chat today. You have been, as long as I've known you, you've been working to get implementation to happen within juvenile justice settings. And as someone who worked at residential that served juvenile justice, I understand the complexities there. And so I just want us to spend a little bit of time today talking about what does that journey look like? It is not easy. It is long and arduous and comes with setbacks and complications. So I kind of want to start just chatting from the beginning. So now that you're here, you've worked at Williamson County Juvenile Justice, you've worked at TJJD for a long time. And now as you're really, Coach Troy coming back through and the coaching really systems through implementation, what does it look like? So when a juvenile justice facility first reaches out to you and is showing interest in implementing TBRI, what are some of the things you ask right off the bat?
Well, one of the first things that I asked is, simply how did you hear about TBRI?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Was it a podcast that you listened to? Were you at a conference and heard somebody speak about TBRI, right? And then we'll kind of have that dialogue back and forth about how they even came to hear about TBRI. So now what's interesting is back in the day, you mentioned Williamson County. We were one of one.
Right. You sure were.
And so we didn't have any other juvenile justice examples to pull from. But now, like, I work with over 20 juvenile justice facilities across Texas and across the country. So there are a lot of examples that people may are different arenas that people may interact with somebody that is involved in juvenile justice while implementing TBRI. So that is typically my first question, is just how did you hear or come to learn about TBRI? And then, another question I might ask is, what is the current state of your facility? What does the milieu look like? Right? Everybody knows corrections typically is a broken system. And that's why we're seeing the rapid growth in juvenile justice adopting TBRI and other, trauma-informed modalities across the country. So those two questions primarily are to kind of jumpstart our initial conversations.
Yeah, and we use, I think, well, first of all, when we talk about broken systems and we talk about juvenile justice, I always think of juvenile justice being such a hard system to transform because communities want punitive action for these kids too, right? Like it's not just the people working in them, but literally like when you have a youth who has committed some kind of offense in their community, people want punitive action. They don't see the redemptive opportunities. And so it's really, really tricky because you're not just trying to change the minds and the hearts of the people working with the kids or organizing the facilities or the leadership or anything like that. Like literally, you have to get funding and buy-in from a lot of different sources that have a lot of different opinions about how this particular subset of kids should be treated. And so I think it's a monumental task, but what we do know is it's possible. So Troy, as you know, like we have kind of a three-stage thought pattern around implementation that is exploration, immersion, and then extension. And so when we think about people just calling, they're in that exploration mode.
Right.
How many times do you think you get somebody that's like, hey, we want to change our whole state? And
Right.
you're like, you need to change one policy.
Right.
Because we would see like that getting outside of our own house is that extension phase. But we're talking right now just about exploration and
Yeah.
what is it you even want? Like, why do you want to do TBRI? Why is this meaningful to you? And sometimes people don't understand the task. And
Yeah.
so I think for people to understand the reason that we're asking like these questions in the beginning is we're trying to understand like do you know what it means to
Right.
explore what you have,
Right.
and what that looks like?
Are fully, go into implementation of what that looks like. Earlier, you mentioned a journey, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
always really emphasize that this is a journey. It's not, you get a little information, you have your teams watch a webinar on
Mm-hmm.
trauma-informed care or TBRI, and then next Tuesday, you guys are fully immersed in implementation. That's not what this looks like, right? So,
No.
yeah, in
Um,
that exploratory phase, oftentimes, a lot of people see the outcomes of, say, a Williamson County because they have stuff that's published, right? And they
mm-hmm.
see those metrics and numbers and those favorable outcomes of the youth, or Harris County, or a lot of other facilities that have been in the game for a while. And they say, hey, we want that for our kids and our
Mm-hmm.
community. But they
Mm-hmm.
don't understand yet the journey that those
Right.
facilities and agencies have been on for years, because
Right.
it doesn't happen overnight, right?
Right.
So I think that's the beauty of that exploratory phase. It's kind of this beautiful dance where we're filling each other out. Like, I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
give you a bunch of information. I might give them some homework, like some
Mm-hmm.
articles to read, right? A couple implementation guide, right? Workbooks that
Mm-hmm.
have been created from other agencies. Look through this, look at policy changes, look at different rules and roles that have been created to, help with the process. And then when we circle back in the next week or two or whatever it is, right, and you have time to go, talk to, or I might even connect them with, the Williamson counties of the world or the TJJDs of the world, so they can hear the voices of those in the field that are
Right.
actively involved in creating that culture. So,
When
um,
you do that, what's the thing you're hoping they will understand about doing this?
that this is a journey, right? And there's peaks and valleys, and it's not going to be easy, right? Because one of the hardest things is changing the hearts and minds of those that are working inside, let alone legislation, right? That, make these policies and mandates and, provide funds for organizations, so on and so forth. But to change how we see, or what our role is in the lives of these kids that are inside the gates, is a tricky, right? And a lot of people have that punitive mindset that we need a pound of flesh. This kid needs to be punished. Well, look here,
Right.
they are punished. They were
Right.
punished when they were removed from their homes and their houses. So are we just going to supervise and annotate every negative thing that they do while they're with us? Are we
Right.
truly trying to rehabilitate these kids and give them skills they need so that they don't reoffend when they get out of our custody
Yeah.
and our care, right?
In those opening conversations, do you talk about the need for a change in mindset from top to bottom?
That's one of the first things we talk about,
Yeah.
right?
And what does that look like?
Well, if it's leadership that's reaching out, the idea of needing to change is already present, right? And that's the reason why they're reaching out. So maybe their facilities are in complete disarray or chaos, or staff are in survival mode, right? There's a whole host of different circumstances that bring people to us, but just the fact that they're reaching out, there's already the idea that something has to change, right? And now I want to gauge whether or not this TBRI thing that I've been hearing about or have heard about, if this is suitable for our population, our culture, our milieu, and our agency, right? So,
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. So, Troy, when we think about implementation, even in the early conversations, but like it circles back all the time. I mean, I would imagine Wilco is like, what, they're 2016, is that when we came out?
yes, ma'am.
And so they're almost 10 years in at this point, and
Yes,
I would
ma'am.
say they would agree that they are still making adjustments and still making changes to make it work, because as soon as you hire a new person, you have to train them, you have to deal with the mindset, you have to, right, like all of that. But for our like within that idea of explore, immerse, extend, we use the framework of chat or cultural historical activity theory to guide people in their implementation. And that comes in really heavily throughout, but some major decisions within that framework have to be made. Within chat, we talk about, an object, which is, where are they going right now? Like, not where do they want to be in 10 years, but what road are they on and where are they trying to go? But then we talk about how when we implement TBRI, things are going to change. So one thing off the bat might be that a rule needs to change. And so when the rule changes, that might change a tool that's being used. That might change somebody's role, right? So when we think about rules, roles, and tools, that impacts every bit of our implementation. But if we go to change a rule and we don't take other things into consideration, that can be really messy. So how do you help organizations think through that process, and what does that look like? You might even have a good example for us.
Yeah, so after, we do trainings and whatnot, I always say you might hear things that contradict, right? So being able to identify some of those contradictions between what policy currently has in place versus best practice and this thing called TBRI that we're talking about, right?
Right.
And showing up as our best selves to serve these kiddos, but things like healthy touch, right? Which we know is a pillar in our engagement strategies, right?
Right.
However, in facilities, literally in black and white, it'll say, do not touch kids. Why? Because there have been too many instances, right, across the country in facilities where kids have been abused. So policies are in place to protect the youth's rights. However, now we're talking about healthy touch helps us expedite the connecting process, right?
Right.
And releases oxytocin and all these great, things. So how do you navigate that, right? So one example at Williamson County early on, what they did was they implemented the engagement strategies within policy and procedure. Now, this gave staff who were reserved and hesitant to engage in a fist bump or a handshake, even though early on we try to really wrap parameters around it and say, hey, we're not talking about full frontal hugs, right? We just talking about a high five, maybe a pat on the shoulder or a fist bump. Right. But that's a lot different than screaming and barking and yelling, because as you know, we were, really military focused, right? And we ran it as a boot camp with drill instructors and all of that. So making that transition, but having that in writing, right? So it's in policy and procedure that I could provide this kid with a fist bump or a handshake, allowed staff, right, an opportunity to step out of their comfort zone and continue to grow, right, as we continue to incorporate more elements of TBRI.
Right. I feel like I remember when we were down at Wilco that we were doing the training and we talked about healthy touch, and somebody literally, like, listen, let's not even talk about the hurdle of what it like just explaining what healthy touch is in the juvenile justice arena can be very complex because I'm not touching those kids. I'm not doing that, whatever,
You try to set me up.
Right. All of those things come into play. But I remember there was a guy who was like really wrestling and he said, right, however, in our policy, it says don't touch the kids. And in this training, you're telling me to touch the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in our policy, it says I'm going to be written up if I touch the kids and potentially lose my job. So when we look at that idea of chat, like we know kids need healthy touch. We
Right.
know that. We know adults need healthy touch. We all need healthy touch. There's so much science behind that that you can't argue it for the benefits, but the how to, what's acceptable, what's appropriate, and getting over the barrier of you set me up, I'm not touching those kids kind of stuff
Right.
really has to be reinforced with policy change. And
Absolutely.
so you can't like that would be a rule you're changing, but you
Yeah,
can't and you're changing part of the role, but you can't change that without protecting the employees too
for sure.
with documentation, with proper training, with, a whole lot of reassurance because, you're talking about people's jobs too,
Yeah. So let's
right?
sit in that, right? So we talk about a policy change with something as simple as incorporating healthy touch, but how that impacts our role, right? So I'm gonna just talk personally in my experience. So as one of the first practitioners, right, that was kind of charged with leading implementation along with the other three. One of the implicit roles that I inherited was role modeling, right, what this looks like as a supervisor on shift, right?
Yeah.
So if I am, and I remember I almost got cussed out by that same gentleman that you're talking about when I
Mm-hmm.
said, look, when the JJAEP arrived, right, because I was a supervisor over the Juvenile Justice Alternative Education Program, aka JJAEP, and the residential program, right, our core program. But as they arrived, typically we would yell and scream and tell them to line up, take their boots off, get ready for inspection. But when I told them Friday that, look, every kid that gets off that bus is going to get a handshake or a fist bump, and we're going to say good morning, I literally almost got cussed out in that meeting, right? So I better get out there and be the first one as these kids get off the bus. Hey, good morning, young man. How you doing? Right? Giving the fist bumps, giving the
Mm-hmm.
handshakes, saying good morning, and all of these things. And I realized that allowed the team, right? Um, Almost gave them permission to do the same, even though some
Right.
of them were a little reluctant still and hands off. This is a
Mm-hmm.
directive that came from the top. So I
Right.
don't want to have to hold you accountable for not doing these things, right?
Right.
But I'm not going to ask you to do anything that I'm not going to do myself.
Right.
So that's
And
like, go
yeah,
ahead.
and if my skill set is to yell and scream, and you're asking me to do something that does not currently exist in my skill set, you better show me how. Just
Right.
like we do with the kids, right? Like we got to practice this in real time so that we get some experience with it too.
Yeah. And I think having somebody that's able to show how is
Mm-hmm.
so critically important within
Right.
facilities. So I want to talk about another role that was created at the Texas Juvenile Justice Department. So as you know, I was kind of hired on into a role that didn't exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my initial role was to train all the staff in the Texas model, right? AKA TBRI at that time. So I did that. I went to all five secure facilities, all the halfway houses, and I trained staff. But I'm a very hands-on person and I can show you better than I can tell you. So it's one thing to
Right.
get up here and train all these elements, but you know what? Let's go to the dorm. Where's the
Mm-hmm.
worst dorm? Let's go over there. I could show you how to connect with kids, right? So when I'm
Mm-hmm.
sitting here talking and training about healthy touch, now I walk on the dorm. I'm not even talking to the staff. I go straight to you, Sarah Mercado. Hey, how you
Mm-hmm.
doing, young lady? And I give you a fist bump and you fist bump me sitting down. And then I say a joke. Oh, that's how you feel, right? You meet strangers sitting down. Nobody,
Mm.
right? Why don't you pop tall real quick? Cool. How you doing, young lady? Now we properly shake hands. And you know what
Mm-hmm.
I mean? Just that playful interaction right there sets the tone for the mood on that dorm, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
staff are seeing like, oh, he didn't do anything inappropriate. This is
Right.
the healthy touch that he's talking about, even though it's, you know, opposite genders, right?
Right.
He still hasn't done anything that would warrant, right, any red
Right.
flags or get him in trouble. And so I
Right.
also talk about having parameters. Like if I'm gonna take said youth, right, Sarah Mercado, that needs to have a conversation, I'm going to make sure one of my other staff, hey, Emily, let me get your ears and eyes, please. Right. So I'm always thinking safety and security
Mm-hmm.
first, right? My job as a supervisor is to protect this kid, but also protect each other, the adults, right? And I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
put anybody in any compromising situation. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but having that individual, I'm sorry, to role model, to have
Mm-hmm.
these discussions on the why, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was so critically important. And that's why having practitioner status that are on the floor, because that's where true change happens, is for
Right.
those that are on the floor. So because of my involvement going around facilities, doing that constantly on the dorm, superintendents were like, yo, we want Troy to come and work here for 6 months. And I'm like, yo, I'm not going to Gainesville for 6 months, right?
Right.
Or I'm not moving down to Edinburgh for 6 months. That's not
Right.
happening. So a need, right? A new
Mm-hmm.
objective kind of arose out of that, which was
Mm-hmm.
to have somebody locally at each facility that can role model and be all
Mm-hmm.
things Texas model. So we ended up hiring what was called Texas Model Mentors, right? And
Mm-hmm.
their primary role was to model, be able to have those conversations,
Mm-hmm.
work and develop staff locally at each facility. So good
I
stuff.
think I think you make a really important point too, because so many, modalities, it's a training, you fill out some forms, you do the thing, and you're done. But with TBRI, we're actually really talking about changing the adults.
Yeah.
And and I think like the idea of having somebody that can actually show an adult what is what and what's going on, and helping them to see like this isn't as scary as it sounds.
Yeah.
Because to be quite honest, the first time I heard TBRI, I was like, there is no way. And so I think in that, like even in that, like maybe not that initial conversation, but when you start to challenge them, like, well, have you thought
Mhm.
about this, or have you thought about that? It's like, are you ready
Yeah.
to spend some budget dollars um, on making sure you have the right people in the right place?
Yeah.
And then also it's to look ahead and say like who are the right people,
Mhm.
because all of these organizations, JJ or not, right, they have this like structure. Well, we have a training department. Well, that you probably do need a TBRI practitioner in your training department,
Mhm.
but what you just said is I actually need a practitioner right there on the floor that
Yeah.
can say, this is what this looks like, and this is how we get there. Um, which means I have to have dollars not only to have the position, or you probably have somebody who can do this already, but
Yeah.
make sure they're the person that gets trained, but you got to have dollars for the training,
Yeah.
so it's like it's not a one and done kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. And identifying those champions is
Hmm.
always critical. And that's kind of part of, so once the agencies move beyond that exploratory phase, right? Can I give an example? I think I can
Yeah,
give
please
a better
do.
example. So, working with an organization, should I say the organization or no?
It doesn't matter.
Okay, cool. So my friends in Ohio, right? Leadership in Ohio heard me and my boy Darius Payne with Harris County speaking on the National Criminal Justice Podcast, right? And I always tease this gentleman. I say, you slid into my DMs. I've never had anybody slide into my DMs
Oh dear.
before, right? When we were growing up, we didn't have DMs to slide into,
No,
right?
no.
So
No,
anyhow,
and I think that might mean something different too.
I think it does mean something different, and that's the humor behind it, right?
But we're old dogs.
Right, right. So he slid into my DM via LinkedIn, right? And he said, hey, I heard you speaking on this podcast. Can we jump on a Zoom call? Right.
Hmm.
So they've identified something needs to change. He's
Right.
now heard about this TBRI thing, right? And how it's impacted juvenile justice in Texas and beyond. So we jump on a Zoom call. I'm on a Zoom with him, their leadership. Um, Having those initial conversations, right? How did you hear about it? What's the current situation and climate like? So then I invited him to speak to all the OGs, I'm gonna call it, right? Those that have, you know, long tenures in the
Hmm.
game. But then they decided that coming out here, flying to Texas, We met at central office at TJJD with some of the TJJD staff. They had tours set up at Williamson County. They had tours set up at some of the TJJD facilities. They talked to Greg Sumter up in Grayson County. You know what I mean? So they're doing their homework. Right. And I love to see that because I'm biased, right? Williams County, TJJD, that's my world. That's my love. I love working in this space, right? But I also want you to hear it from different department heads across the state that can give you their perspective and how it has impacted their culture, because everybody's journey is unique, although there are patterns that are similar, right, throughout those that are successful. So anyhow, now they've decided to move past that exploratory phase. I ended up going and spending 3 weeks in Ohio, 1 week in Cleveland, 1 week in Canton, 1 week in Columbus, right, doing basically 4 days each week of trainings for all of their staff as they're identifying champions. And in that process, right, those staff, I had several staff coming up inquiring, right, asking really good questions during the breaks, wanting to take me to lunch, right, having sit down chats. So some people already naturally kind of embody TBRI, and their heart and their passion wants to show up for kids in this capacity and really help and reform them. And those are the people, especially the ones that have the respect of the staff, right? But those are the people that I always kind of highlight to leadership, right? Hey, so-and-so came up to me and was asking me some really good questions, right? And kind of told me a bunch of stories about how they interact with kids. And this might be a good individual to look at. But as they move beyond that exploratory phase, this is kind of that first step into the immersion phase, right? And the implementation process. Now they currently have 9 practitioners, and they have another 8 practitioners slated to are slotted for the May and June practitioner training. So they're building their army of practitioners and change agents, right, per their 3 facilities, which is incredibly exciting.
Yeah. Well, and like it paints the perfect picture of that idea of it exploring an immersion, right? Like they'll be in immersion for a couple of years, right? If not longer, because this is deep work, and it's deep work for the adults, and until the adults get right, and and I was one of those like that had to do a lot of personal work to even be able to do this work. But until the adults are, I don't want to say get right. I want to say like get their mindset to a place where they can meet the needs of kids in a different way. It takes time. And like, I mean, I can remember, Troy, when we were doing this in foster care, people were like, what are we going to do when they don't do it?
Right.
And I'm like, we just gave them the first training. They're not going to do it. Right. Like, slow down. So there will be a moment, and I think it's something you feel. It's not a timeline. It's not anything. When you say like, now we're holding it, right? Like if you can't get on board with this, it's time to apply somewhere else. But like that there's a moment, I think, when you feel that like there's so like the movement is happening and this 1 or 2 people, and then you address that. But like,
I knew at Williamson County, when my boy Kevin came to me, and I was ready to, like, we had been working with this kiddo for hours, right? And I was at my rope's end, and I was, one step away from, look, residential or separation is our next step, right? Because you've been non-compliant. We've had several people trying to work with you, including mental health. But my boy, who was really black and white and really heavy into the punitive side, came and was like, sir, can I just take him out on the secure rec yard on the track and maybe talk to him for maybe 5 minutes? When he started advocating for kids, you talk about that shift, right?
Yep.
Where he was always the first one. Like, a kid didn't want to visit his mom one time in visitation, and he was like, we need to write him up and lock him up.
Right.
Mom came way out here from wherever she lives to visit, and this is unacceptable behavior. Not understanding the trauma,
Right.
that this kid has gone
Right.
through because of mom, right? And so again, when I say having that practitioner trained individual that can see the need behind these behaviors and to be able to
Mm-hmm.
articulate the why to the staff, that's what I'm referring to. Those conversations that happen, right? That, leadership, they're removed from the floor. But again, that's why we always say, initially, don't send suits to practitioner training, right?
No.
Get those supervisors or your mid management, right? People
Mm-hmm.
that can communicate up the chain, but also, be on the floor
Right.
with the teams and the staffs, modeling and having those conversations because your staff, and I've been asked to write people up sometimes for doing things a little bit different. And I've had to advocate for my staff. Like, no, I'm not writing them up for doing exactly what we've asked them to do. Like maybe it didn't look the way it should look, but allow me to help the staff
Right.
grow. It wasn't anything egregious that happened. They didn't do anything that violated any PREA or A&E rights, right?
Right.
So allow me to use this as a platform to help the staff grow because that's what I'm asking my team to do with the
Right.
kids.
Well, and like if you take that time, you then get this guy that was highly punitive saying, let's go take him out to the rec yard and move our
Right.
bodies and have a conversation. And
Mm-hmm.
and for both of those individuals, the adult and the kid, you get massive gains
Mm,
because all of a sudden now this staff is using a tool that he never used before. He's working a muscle he's never worked
mm-hmm.
before. And the outcome of that, it sounds like, was that the kid regulated and was able to get kind of back into the programming of the day because this adult took the time to meet the need.
Sir,
And
that was just the outcome that day.
right,
We're
right,
talking about shifting behavior over the course of 6 to 8 months while that
right,
kid was there with us, where this kid was getting restrained 3 and 4 times a day, right?
right,
4 or 5 times a week, whatever it was, right? We saw a huge shift in
right.
the entire behavior because when you find yourself surrounded with people that want to advocate for you and help you meet expectations, not
Mm-hmm.
dictate and tell you what expectations need to be
Right,
met or this is the consequence, it's a completely different ball game.
right,
And this support is something that this kid has never felt before. So when
right.
we start talking about shaping behavior, I like to do the correcting principles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Presentation, but really, we're really talking about shaping behaviors and giving these kids another set of skills and
Mm-hmm.
tools to where they don't have to use those maladaptive. And this is
Right.
getting a little bit off topic of, you know, JJ implementation, but I think it's all,
Well,
relevant.
I think though it speaks to the idea that this is going to take a long time,
Hmm.
and that's okay because you don't get to the other side of this adult taking this kid on a walk during a highly stressful situation
Right.
where Troy, even you were done,
I was
right?
done.
And he
Right.
comes in, and that happens, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
the most experienced among us are done.
Hmm.
Um, let's shift back a little bit. I want to kind of a couple of things, but let's talk about challenges because there are challenges. So, what are some of the challenges you've seen in like administration over the years?
Yeah. Um, yeah. So some of the challenges with administration, if they're not fully bought in,
Hmm.
right, that poses a challenge because they won't provide the necessary resources to the teams to really, like you talk about
Hmm.
dollars, right? Invested in people going to practitioner training, right? Creating new spaces for staff to be able to use to help kids regulate, right? If they
Hmm.
don't fully understand what TBRI implementation entails, that
Hmm.
creates a challenge. I've had a chief one time flat out say, I can't give a kid a redo. It's not happening, right? So this is not a fit for us, right?
Mm.
And he was kind of brought in. Anyhow, I ain't gonna talk too much about that.
Yeah, I think you make an important point though, and I think one of those is that for administration, this isn't actually just something that the staff, quote unquote, staff does.
Yeah,
This is something that the organization does.
yeah,
And in the role of if you're in an administration, your role is to TBRI the people that
right,
that you supervise.
yeah,
And then the people that you supervise should be TBRIing the people below that, which means maybe the chief isn't giving a kid a redo, but he should be giving the person below him a redo
Right.
when things don't go quite right. Like in that level of language use should just permeate the entire organization top to bottom. And I'll often say in trainings like, hey, leaders raise your hands. Like if you have behavior happening among the people that work for the organization, they may not feel safe with you. So
Yeah.
you probably need to look at what am I doing that doesn't create felt safety.
Yeah.
Um,
I just highlighted an organization, Cameron County, on our last Juvenile Justice TBRI Connection Network call, because they understood that part of the assignment better than a lot of folks out there, right? And they have
mhm,
done an amazing job pouring into their teams and their
mhm.
staff, right?
Yeah,
Um, they have a weekly and monthly like spotlight, right, where
right.
they illustrate a staff and recognize them
Mhm.
for, you know, some element of programming that they've done, right? They've created a break room for their staff.
Right.
And that
So
says,
good.
hey, we understand that this is difficult work.
Mhm.
Right. If you need 5, 10 minutes, one of our supervisors, whoever, a rover is going to come and relieve you, and you can go take 5, 10, 15 minutes
Mhm.
to yourself. Right. And they've got
Mhm.
a couch and some aromatherapy and snacks provided by the county, right?
Right.
For their staff. And it just
Right.
has created this culture where the staff feel seen, valued, and heard.
Right.
Right. And
Turns out that's really, really, really important. I mean, I
right.
I think I think that one of the most important things that our management and our administration teams can do is take really, really, really good care of those doing the direct care work, whether it's teachers, direct care staff,
Yeah.
uh, uh, JSO, or whatever the titles are. Like if we don't take care of them really well, our kids are not going to have their needs met.
Yeah.
It's too hard because if your needs aren't met, how do you help somebody else?
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I remember one time I got reprimanded, kinda, right? Um, and I don't even remember what it was for. But typically you get reprimanded or have to sign a piece of paper. You're really angry about that, right?
yeah.
But this particular senior supervisor that I had highlighted so much of the strengths. Like I walked out of that meeting, Sarah, feeling like I was Superman, right? And that this was a very small, irrelevant, almost, what am I looking for? Formality, right, that we had to
Hmm.
go through. Um, but he spent so much time pouring into me in that meeting and talking about the strengths, right? And how to properly deploy like my big voice, right?
Hmm.
How to use, my natural leadership abilities. Like I literally walked out with a cape on my back, feeling like, okay, cool, I want to be even better, right?
Right.
So I'm gonna fix whatever I need to fix, and and then some, right?
Right.
And so I've always kind of tried to take that approach too. I want to illustrate and highlight and pour into my teams and my staff so much. And like even little inputs when I'm writing their evaluations, right?
Hmm.
Now this, there's a lot that is riding on this. If you get a bad eval, you don't get your merit raise, no matter how little that might be,
Right.
right? But every little bit counts. But I would expound on their strengths so heavily. And it's not to say
Hmm.
I'm not holding folks accountable because I do, and they know,
Right.
right? But I want to illustrate your strengths
Hmm.
in a way that anybody that reads this gets a clear picture of who Sarah Mercado is,
Yeah.
right? And her
Yeah.
heart and her passion and what she means um, in this facility. So,
Well,
yeah,
having things to improve on is what we call human,
right.
right? Like we're going to make mistakes. We're working in high pressure situations all the time. I mean, right? Like it's if we're not working on development, and one of the things that I think is such an opportunity are those development plans. I
Yeah.
think they're always used very punitively, but the what you were just talking about, like you had something to fix, but
Hmm.
the way that developmental plan was used was with connection, was
Right.
with felt safety. You weren't threatened. You were told what you were doing well. Like we're just going to build this skill over here because you don't quite have it yet.
Right.
And that's okay. We
Yeah.
actually don't have every skill that we need to do life,
Right.
all the way through. And so it's like everything that none of that has to come with shame or blame or anger. So I think that's a really good thing. What do you see as, I just want to jump real quick into challenges with our direct care folks.
Well, staffing, right, is always a challenge, especially in this field, especially post-COVID. I know we've been removed from COVID for some long time now, but you still kind of feel the effects
For sure.
of that, especially in facilities. So, um, helping direct care staff that are in the trenches, on the floor every day, right? A lot of times they'll say, you don't understand what we deal with every day. Well, on the contrary, I do, right?
Right.
So when I'm in trainings with folks, I'm using a lot of examples, personal examples of being spat on, of being cussed at, right? And you know how I talk. Right, and how I train. We're gonna keep it raw. We're gonna keep it real, right? Because it ain't pretty, right? And you have some facilities where kids are throwing feces on folks, right? That's not pretty. So how do you convince folks or change their hearts and minds when they've witnessed or been subject to feces being thrown on them? Right? Because Sarah, you throw something on me like that,
Oh,
I
no,
don't know if
like
I
it.
ever would, right?
No.
You spit in my face or you assault somebody that I care about, you know what I mean? So that's hard, right? But the reality is the more connected the kids are, the less likely they are to act in those ways.
Right.
And it's as simple as that, right?
Right.
I haven't been assaulted other than being spit on because I walked in front of who he was trying to spit on accident, right?
Interference.
Right. But me personally, but that's because I had healthy connections with the kids, right? I would even have kids say, sir, when you leave, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm begging them like, no, why? Well, because I don't like this person. But you don't owe it to me. You owe it to you.
Right.
Right. To act, the way that you're supposed to and use the, the regulation skills and techniques that you've learned, right? When you get, upset. But direct care staff, they're in the thick of it. So I always try to really just understand that and give them grace.
Right.
You know what I mean? But one of the most challenging elements, especially in my role being removed from the floor, because again, working with the kids was the easy part.
Right.
This is harder
100%.
than working with the kids. I could work with kids all day long, right? And I can show you better than I can tell you, but providing examples and then allowing them space to be able to try, and providing effective feedback, that's always, a challenge because if something doesn't go right, then it's easy to say, you know what, the heck with this. But I did, even with counties that I would work with, like I mentioned, Cameron County, I had a gentleman, he would text me on a Saturday or a Sunday, hey, Mr. Troy, this incident happened with this kid, and instead of locking him up, we went down to, said dorm, right? And we just shadow box, right? And I showed him some techniques and some MMA stuff that I do. And then we did some deep breathing because, his heart rate got elevated and, he was kind of breathing shallow, and we did some deep breathing, but then I didn't lock him up. We just kind of went on with programming. Is that TBRI? Right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Because it was the connection, right? It was the connection piece. This kid was acting out, and instead of doing what we've always done, you decided to do things just a little bit different, right? And really connect before we corrected. Now, you still annotated whatever was going on, but we didn't have to lock this kid in a cage for 24 hours or however long. So that's a beauty to see when direct care staff start to really embody the principles and showing up because they realize that it's about me and how I show up.
Right.
That same,
I think sorry, go ahead.
my bad. That same gentleman that was very black and white at Wilco, I referenced earlier, he said something that was super profound. He said, when we change our behavior, the kids change their behavior.
Yeah,
and
that's
it's
true.
as simple as that.
Because our behavior change usually involves meeting a kid's need.
Exactly.
I think one of the things that we have to be cautious about in implementation with our direct care staff is that often they feel like we're taking away the tools they have before we give them ones that are proven.
Right.
And this is like learning a new language, right? And so taking the time. So I guess just to wrap us up for today, when are they done? When is implementation done?
Never done.
Never done.
It's a continuum,
Yeah.
right? And we're
Yeah.
talking about a state of being. One of my pals from Grayson County, he said TBRI is not something we do, it's something we become.
Right.
Right. So we're never done learning, and I'm damn good at TBRI, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I just gave you an example where I was at the end of my rope. Like
Mm-hmm.
Troy is still Troy from where I come from, with a set of, conditioned responses to stress and adversity and all of these other things. And
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? Work conditioning, right? From
Right.
being in a military boot camp and, all of those things. So we're all human at the same time. So being able to rely on one another, our teams, right? Tapping each other out when need be, being able to circle back and say, hey, kiddo, I was wrong, man. My bad.
Right.
That ain't how I should have said that to you. Right.
Right.
And I understand how you could have received that, because if I was in your shoes, I might have too. And I might have been
Right.
offended. So I just want to be the first to apologize to you. Right.
Yeah.
But I say that to say, this is truly a journey. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a continuum. I'm still learning
Right.
as I step into this role, right? Or have
Right.
stepped into this role and work with different systems of care, right? And learning from people and their experiences, and all of that good stuff. So
Yeah.
I would say we're
Coach
never done.
Troy, thanks for
Yes,
being
ma'am.
with us on the podcast again. We appreciate you.
Well, it's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure talking with you, Sarah.
The TBRI podcast is produced by the Care and Purpose Institute of Child Development at TCU. To learn more about TBRI and the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit child.tcu.edu/podcast.